from prison on Yud Gimel Tammuz. Yud Beis Tammuz, I think the proclamation came out to release him, but he was actually released on Yud Gimel Tammuz. So it's called the Yom Tov of Freedom, I think they call it. And Akiva's giving tikkun today because of the celebration of the freeing of Rebbe Rayat. I read an interesting blurb. No, when they let him out of Russia, they didn't just let him out of jail, they let him out of Russia. When they let him out of Russia, he said, I have to take this guy with me. And this guy was the Lubavitch Rebbe, the one that didn't die. The Lubavitch Rebbes, there was a lot of Lubavitch Rebbes, and all of them died except for the last one. And he said, I have to take this gentleman out with me as well. And they said, who's this guy? He says, he's the guy who I need to marry my daughter. So he wasn't married or engaged yet, but the Rebbe already knew that he wanted him as an Adam. So I was wondering, what's halacha if a potential shver, because he says he wants you as an item, he gets you out of Russia, and then you get out of Russia, but you don't want to marry her. Like, what happens? How does that work? You have to go back to Russia? It worked out at that. He married the Rebbe's daughter. But what if he just wanted to use her to get out? It's called a mail order groom. But Baruch Hashem, everything worked out. Okay, so we are up to the Ayin Beis, Amud Beis, 4 lines from the bottom, the second word from the end of the line. The Elu Nish'alen Urim v'Tumim. We said in the Shmoyne Begadim, that's the method, that's the way they would ask a shaila of the Urim v'Tumim. We're going to learn a very interesting Gemara today about how the questioning worked with the Urim v'Tumim. Good morning, Bensi. Okay, also Rav Dimi. Amari said, the Gadim Shekoin Gadol Mishamish Behen, Meshuach Muhammad Mishamish Behen. At the end of Dvarim, we learned Kiseitziv HaMachama Layedecha, and we learned there was a general who got up and told everybody who can go home if you just planted a vineyard, if you just bought a home, if you just married a woman, you go home. And then he was mechazek the army. He can go home as well. And then he was mechazek the army. So the Meshuach Muhammad was the person who did this job. He was the one who did this job, and he was considered a kohen, and he was able to wear Shmoyne Begadim. There was a whole shaila when they were showing him if you need a Meshuach Muhammad only for a Mochemes Rishus, or if you even need it for a Mochemes Mitzvah. The reason why it's a shaila if you need it for a Mochemes Mitzvah is because you don't say Miya Ish HaYorev HaRachlevav when it comes to a Mochemes Mitzvah. It's even a Chosam Echipasai has to participate in a Mochemes Mitzvah. But there are those who learn that he still had a role to play. A is he was Mechazek the army, and B is he actually went and fought with them. So the halacha is, Abdimi said that the same begodim that the Kohen Gadol would do avodah with, the Kohen that was Meshuach Muhammad, the Kohen who was sort of the general, Mishamish ben, when he did avodah, he would also wear these Shmoyne Begadim. Shenemar, because it says in the pasuk, "Uvigdei HaKodesh Asher LaAharon Yu Levanav Acharav," and we learn from Acharav is Lemi Shaba Bigdula Acharav. The Rashash explains the person whose level of Gedula is slightly below the Kohen Gadol himself, so it's sort of a lesser madrega of Kohen Gadol. He also wears his big day kodesh. Let's see Rashi. Oh, actually, it's Rashi on the next thing. But I'll just read Rashi over here. Hi, Achrav Kroy Yisera, who is extra. Lemidus Ba code. Oh, I'm sorry. That's also later on. I'm sorry. So the Rashash explains that the Achrav means someone who's a little bit less in Gedula than the actual Kohen Gadol also has the benefit of wearing the Shmoyne Begadim. Moshe for Reb Ada Ba'ava, Rami Lo Kedi. Either Reb Ada Ba'ava asked the kasha or Kedi asked the question. And the Brisa says, Yochel Yehei Benoi from Meshuach Muhammad Mishamish Tachtov Kederach Shebenoi Shekohen Gadol Mishamish Tachtov. You might think that the role of Meshuach Muhammad is hereditary; it's passed down from father to child, just like the role of Kohen Gadol is passed down from father to child. So this is quite a mouthful because it takes on the hanacha that Kahuna Gedola transfers from father to child. So Rashi gives us a lot of background information on that. It says as follows. Yochel yebenoi shel Mashuach Mochama Meshamish Tachto. Yochel tegedulas Mashuach Mochama Yerusha. Uyos benoi kodim Mechalada. Just like Kederach shebenoi shel Kohen Gadol Meshamish Tachto. Just like the Kohen Gadol is Yerusha, you might think the Mashuach Mochama is Yerusha. Zok Rashi, we need to tell you a little bit about the background of what led to this question. Reish the Brayso Hochitanyala. B'Toras Kahanim Gabi Asir Seifa. Asir Seifa is the Michas Chavitin that the Kohen Gadol had to bring every day, and half of it was brought in the morning, and half of it was brought in the afternoon. And it says that Kohen HaMashiach, the Kohen who not only was Shemon Begadim, but he also was smeared with the Shemin HaMishcha because they had the Shemin HaMishcha in the first place of Mikdash. So a Kohen HaMashiach is usually referring to a Kohen Gadol in the first place of Mikdash, not to be confused with the Mashuach Mochama, which is something completely different. A Kohen HaMashiach is a Kohen Gadol who was in the first place of Mikdash when they still had Shemin HaMishcha. Ainli Ela Mashiach, Meruba Begadim Inayim. In the second base of Mikdash, the only distinction of a Kohen Gadol was that he wore a Shemoyne Begadim, because he didn't get Mashiach because there was no longer access to the Shemin HaMishcha. So how do you know that the Meruba Begadim has to bring the Michas Chavitin in the second base of Mikdash? Talmud Loimer B'Hakayin is Marba even a Meruba Begadim. Yachal Shani Marba Af Mashuach Mochama. You might think the Hakayin is so inclusive. It also includes the lesser Madrega of Kohen, the Kohen HaMashuach Mochama. Hamloimer Tachtov Mivana. Misha B'noi Oimet Tachtov. The only type of Kohen Gadol that brings the Michas Chavitin is the Kohen Gadol that could yarshin it to a son. But the Kohen Gadol that doesn't pass down from generation to generation, which is the role of the Mashuach Mochama, Yata Mashuach Mochama, She'ein B'noi Oimet Tachtov. And now the Gemara asks, which is where we enter the scene. How do you talk and know that? Talmud Loimar, and now we're already going on Talmud Aleph. The Kohen wears it for 7 days. It excludes what type of Kuna Gedola goes Birusha, a Kuna Gedola, where his main role is to go to the Oil Maiden to do Avodah. But that's not the role of the Mashuach Mochama. Therefore, his role, the Mashuach Mochama, does not go down hereditary. The Gabi Kohen Gadol Tanya B'Duch Yachritim Terskan, referring to the Kohen Gadol, there's another brayso that says, L'kahen Pachas Ovid, to do the Kuna instead of a son. Melamed Shaben Koydem L'Chaladam. The son has priority to take over from his father before everybody else, but with an important condition. You might think the son can take it over even if he's not a royal lakach. The Kohen Gadol has kedima to get this position over anybody. The Kohen Gadol's son has kedima to get this position over any other Kohen Gadol, but that's only if he's royal. But if he's not royal, then even if it's his father, he doesn't get the job. So it's interesting to know what's this for. Why should the Mashuach Mochama not go hereditary? So somebody, the Mashuach Mochama had an extremely important skill. He had to be able to strengthen the people. He had to be able to warn the people. He had to have the gift of the gab. He had to be able to be a good orator to fire up the troops. Just because a father has that skill or that talent, it doesn't necessarily mean that the child will. So that it's really very, very job skills focused or job talents focused. And therefore, it couldn't necessarily go Birusha. But the Kohen Gadol was a voidus that you could learn. He didn't have to have any special personality, and that's why he was able to go down Birusha.
What's the argument? If you read the point that you just said, then we also have from the Bible that we learn out that the Chavitim is only for some dollar. That was happening to the thinker.
What's happening is that what?
It should be passed. I mean,
Well, my story is really it's the pasuk. The pasuk says it's not passed down. What I just said now was the Gemara's teretz, right? The Libra does dafka koyin who does avoid in the elmoid dafka his kahuna gedela goes birusha, but a koyin who doesn't do the avodah like the Meshulach Muhammad. Right, I said a svara, but my svara is not really worth anything because if the Torah would have said for carrot, I would have had to come up with a svara for carrot. I'm so convinced that my svara is right that I would have flipped it in a second if the limud would have said otherwise. Of course. So I love this Rashi. Rashi says that kahuna gedolah beikar goes birusha, but that's only if he's roy lakach. So there was a bacher in Philadelphia Yeshiva in my days who was from Toronto, whose father was a lawyer, and when he finished high school, his father wanted him very much to go to law school, and of course Rosh Yeshiva Rebellia told this boy, no, you should stay in Yeshiva. You have a very promising life in Torah. So Rebellia told the father, I'm going to fly down to Toronto because I want to discuss your son's future. So the father said, how could I make your yeshiva fly down to Toronto to discuss my son's future with me? I'm going to get on the plane and I'm going to fly down to Philadelphia. In those days, you just got on a plane and flew down to Philadelphia. You didn't have to take COVID tests and wait in line in security and get poked and prodded. You just went, right? Those were the good old days. So you get to Philadelphia and you're sitting down at the meeting, and she says, I think your son has a very promising future in Torah. I don't think he should leave yeshiva. So the father said, listen, I have a responsibility to teach my son Parnasa. It's a halacha. I have to teach my son Parnasa. And I have a law firm. So if I train him as a lawyer, boom. Now, if I had a yeshiva, I might decide to train my son to be a yeshiva. But I don't have a yeshiva. I have a law firm. So therefore, I needed to go to law school. So he says, no, he's so promising. So then this lawyer, beautiful, he asked Rebellia the following question. Rosh Yeshiva, what would happen if there's a position available in your yeshiva? And my son was a little bit more royal than your son to get the position. Who would get the position? Rebellia said, my son. So the lawyer answered, and in my law firm, if someone was a little bit more qualified than my son will get the position. So Rebellia said, listen, this is my yeshiva. I have no choice. I have to eat to my son. But I promise you, I take personal responsibility that your son will get a wonderful position in chinuch, and I will make sure personally that gets taken care of. And in fact, that's what happened. Today, this not a Hingaman anymore. He's 60 years old, but I can call him a Hingaman. Has a very nice dollar. Okay, David, who was it? You can probably guess. You're on mute.
I would guess it was Aaron Grubner.
No. But that's a good guess because he was older than me. Avi's younger than me. And this boy married someone who has no money at all. He married a Rob's daughter.
Don't know. I don't. Harry Wolf. Oh. Harry Wolf. Okay. Okay.
It was a good story, but I remember it happened when I was in Yeshiva. Okay, so the Gemara wants to know, how do you know that, I hope Yosy Wolf never watches this video. And if he does, I'll say, what were you doing on YouTube? So I'll be okay. So the Gemara says, how do you know that the Meshulach Muhammad is not Mishamish Tachtov, just like the regular Kohen Gadol? And then the pasuk adds, Asher Yovoy al Oil Moyed, Rashi sticks in Lachaper Bakodesh. Misha Royu Loboy al Oil Moyed, the Kohen Gadol who is going to do avoiding the Oil Moyed, that's the Kohen Gadol who's Yil B'Shem HaKoyen Tachtov Ribonav. But the Meshulach Muhammad doesn't go Birusha. Strike the Gemara. Then Isa, if you hold that he wears Shmoyne Begodim, Michse Chazi, then in fact the Meshulach Muhammad is royal to do the avodah. The whole var is you're saying the Meshulach Muhammad is not royal to do avodah, but if he's wearing begodim, he is royal to do avodah. And Rashi explains why. Because the Chsiv v'Yom HaKippurim, I'm on the third line of Rashi, What does the word Yimale Yisyoda mean? When the Torah says, who is the Kohen who does Avodah Yom Kippur? The Kohen that's Yimale Yisyoda. What does Yimale Yisyoda mean? So Rashi b'chol Mili Yadayim Ayidei HaBegodim Hu. Mili Yadayim refers to the Begodim. K'dichsevu Vigdei HaKodesh Asher L'Aaron. That's called a Miloi. So once you're saying that the Mashiach Muhammad wears Shmoyne Begodim, so why can't he be just like Kohen Gadol? Why shouldn't he be able to do Avodah Yom Kippur? A and B, and therefore pass on his stellar to his child. The pasuk you don't learn that tells you anyone who's royal to do avodah, that person passes on his position to his child. Rather, the limud you should extract from the pasuk is someone whose initial appointment was specifically to do avodah. That's only the real kohen gadol. That's the position that passes on hereditarily. However, if you are qualified to do the avodah, but that's not your primary responsibility that you're appointed for, rather you're appointed just to be a Mashiach Mochama, that position will not get passed on. Amazing fact, the Gemara. The Brayso says, Mashiach Mochama, Eina Meshamish, Loi Bar Ba K'chayin. When he wants to do avodah on a regular day, he cannot use 4 begodim, like a Kohen Hedjit, and Loi B'Shmoyne K'chayin Gadol. And he cannot use Shmoyne K'chayin Gadol, he's stuck. But you have a ride from here that he doesn't wear Shmoyne Begodim. You said earlier that Rabbi said earlier that the Kohen HaMashiach wore Shmoyne Begodim. This Brayso says not like that. Abai said you need to understand this Brayso. Can't take it at face value. Elazar Mashras Lay. You're now making him into a sorry. He can't do any avoid at all. It's correct. Mikan. Of course not. Ela Kohen Gadol Mishameva. Really, he could wear Shmoyne Begodim, and that's the right thing for him to wear. The problem is, if he wears Shmoyne Begodim, if he's walking around the base of Mikdash in the Shmoyne Begodim, the Kohen Gadol is going to look at him and say, "Why are you infringing on my territory? It's going to create Eva." And Kohen Hedit Mishum Malam Bekodesh V'Loi Meridi, because it's Malam Bekodesh V'Loi Meridi. Once you're on that level, you can't go back down. So the shaila really is a Mashiach Muhammad that never did avodah, never wore yet Shmoyne Begodim. So oy bazoi, why is there a problem of Malam Bekodesh V'Meridi? So what the Rishonim answer, which clarifies things, is that Avada he wore when he was standing there in front of the army, he was in full uniform. He wore the Shmoyne Begodim then. So therefore, once he wore Shmoyne Begodim, even though it wasn't for the avodah, it was for the purpose of leading the Milchama, that already makes it that he can no longer wear the Begodim of a Kohen Hedjid because of Malam Bekodesh V'Loi Meridi.
When is the Mashiach? This Kohen Mashiach. When is he appointed?
I guess I'm not sure if he's on staff all the time, or if they only appoint him if they're coming into a war. I'm not sure if they had one on staff the whole time. If they operated like the Canadian government, he for sure was on staff all the time, even though they never have wars.
So that should be a raya that he was already appointed or not appointed. Well, wait a minute. He gets the same truma as anybody else.
Yeah, he's for sure is a regular Kohen.
Right. It's just a covered issue now.
Well, now it's a question. No, it's more than a covered issue. Halacha may he do avodah in Shmoyne Begodim.
But
and halacha may he do avodah in Arba Begodim.
Yeah, before
halacha, if he did avodah in Shmoyne Begodim, even though it's Eva, at least it'll be a kosher avodah. But if he did avodah in Arba Begodim, it wouldn't be a kosher anymore.
Right, but he would only do it after he was chosen as a
Mashiach Muhammad.
Right, and if he's not chosen until there's a war,
he had to have an active role. If he never had an active role, then he would never have worn yet the Shmoyne Begodim.
Right. Okay.
So Amalei Rav Bar Aval Urim. Rav Bar asked another kasha, Rabbi. The high Tana, I'm going to show you a Tana, the less Le'eva, because you were saying the only reason why the Mashiach Muhammad would not wear the Shmoyne Begodim is because of Eva. But the Etzem, he could wear it. But I'm going to show you a Tana who doesn't hold it as far of Eva, and he still holds that the Kohen Mashiach does not wear Shmoyne Begodim, but like a Mishamish, which would then be a kash on Rabdini, who says that he did wear the Shmoyne Begodim. The Tanya, The following list are the differences between a kohen gadol and a kohen heavy. And Rashi and the Rishonim take out par kohen Mashiach because Rashi says it's the same thing as the par haba kol mitzvahs. The par haba kol mitzvahs that kohen gadol is over a chayv pieces. He brings a special par. We bring Yisrael brings a normal korban chatos. But the kohen gadol had a special carbon, so only the kohen gadol brings that special carbon. Upaya mekipurim, which could only be brought through the kohen gadol. Masir Seifa, the minchas chavitin, like we discussed earlier, is something that's exclusively brought by the kohen gadol. Loi pereya, he doesn't need his hair grow long if he's an oval. Loi perim, he doesn't tear his clothing if he's an oval. Aval perim humi lamata, he does tear his clothing a little bit at the bottom. Actually says like the bottom hem, where it's not so noticeable, but he doesn't tear it up on top. The hedgit, but a kohen hedgit, the rice is proper kriya milamaila. Once again, they imatam kroiva. It says by the kohen hedgit la'avu v'limoy v'lachoysa epsula kroiva love v'lovnoi levita. The 7 kroivim, a normal kohen could be matama, but the kohen gadol is not matama even for kroivim. Mutzuva labsula, a kohen gadol is only allowed to he's only allowed to marry a basula. Umujal almana, there's a lav almana gusha. A kohen gadol may not marry an almana. And if he dies, the Ritayach gets released from the Urim Miklot, when the right schim get released from the Urim Miklot, only if a Kohen Gadol dies. Umakriv Oinen, even if a Kohen Gadol is an Oinen, like we learned in the Parsha where Dorish Moshe, the Kohen Gadol will still do Avodah, but the Eino Yochel, even though he'll do Avodah, when he's an Oinen, he doesn't eat from Kochim when he's an Oinen. The Eino Yochel, he doesn't even get a piece. So in other words, let's say tonight he's no longer going to be an Einin, and there was a carbon brought, so he'll say, give me a chelik and a chatas. I can't eat it today, but tonight, when I'm no longer an Einin, I'll be able to eat it. So the Gemara teaches us that he doesn't even, while he's an Einin, he doesn't even get to take a piece. We know the Kohen Gadol could walk around anywhere in the base of Mikdash. If they're distributing meat from any type of carbon, he could say, I'll take that. Right? Any avodah that's being done, he could say, sir, thank you very much for your help. I got it from here. Right? And he uses 8 begonim, like we discussed, the big day Zahav. Upater al tumas mikdash v'kedashav. The Kohen Gadol is pater from a various of mikdash v'kedashav. Rashi says we learned it up. We learned this halach in Masechet Hariyos. And v'chal avodah is Yom Kippurim einan kesheres alaboy. And all of the avodas of Yom Kippurim are only kosher. This is like a benign little sentence, but this is a massive machloikis rishonim. What does it mean? Now we know the special avodas done specifically for Yom Kippur can only be done by the Kohen Gadol. But there's a machloikis rishonim if all of the avodas of the whole day could only be done through the Kohen Gadol, which will make his day much harder. Now we learned at the Mishnah at the beginning of the Masechta that they were paisos. The shaila is, were these paisos done on Yom Kippur as well, or maybe not, because maybe he had to do all of the avodas. Because there's actually a machlokes how to learn this line. Does that mean every single thing that's done on Yom Kippur has to be done only by the Kohen Gadol, or does it mean the avodas that are special for the day of Yom Kippur only have to be done by the Kohen Gadol? All of these halachas apply even to a Kohen Gadol in the second base of Mikdash, who did not have the Meshicha with the Shemin HaMishcha. Chutz mi par habal kol mitzvahs. The par habal kol mitzvahs you could only bring if you had Meshicha from the Shemin HaMishcha, which would have been in the first base of Mikdash. And Rashi tells us because there are psukim that we learned this from. And now is the important line. All of these halachas apply to a Kohen Gadol who's no longer a Kohen Gadol. For instance, if the Kohen Gadol became apostle because he became Tamei or whatever, and they had to appoint another Kohen Gadol instead of him, and then the original Kohen Gadol, his problem got rectified, so now you have the second Kohen Gadol who is now laid off. So all of these halachas apply to this Kohen who is laid off, meaning if he dies, it also frees the Reitzchem from the Ir Miklat, and all the other things listed in the price. Chutz mi par Yom Kippurim, which is only done by the active Kohen Gadol, Basir Saifa, and the Michas Chavitim that's brought daily is only brought by the active Kohen Gadol, and now is the main line. All of these halachas listed do not apply to the Meshuach Muhammad. Chutz, the only thing that does apply to the Meshuach Muhammad is Chameshes Dvarim Hamurim B'Parsha, which are loy Pereya, V'loy Perim, Avelistic issues, V'loy Metamal Kraivav, U'Mitzuba Labasula, U'Muzra and Halmana, U'Machzes Retzech Chediv Rabbi. According to Rabbi, it would also be Machzes Retzech, V'Cham Eini Machzes. But whatever the case is, you see clearly that he does not wear Shmoyne Begadim, because it says Mechulon Einai Hagis to Meshuach Muhammad. So you see, a Meshuach Muhammad does not wear Shmoyne Begadim. So the problem is, you see that he doesn't hold of Eva because the Kohen Gadol Sha'avar does wear the Shmoyne Begadim, yet the Meshuach Muhammad does not wear Shmoyne Begadim. How do you understand that? Zok to Gemara, Ki lesle Eva b'dekavase. If it was a real Kohen Gadol appointed instead of me, and he's on my Madrega, he was chosen as the Kohen Gadol. No, if he wears it, if he wears the Big Kahuna, that won't bother the Kohen Gadol as much. But with the Zut B'nei, the Meshuach Muhammad was not on such a high level. He was only the Meshuach Muhammad Kohen Gadol. Every schlepper is wearing my exclusive clothing, Isla, then he would have a problem. So you could offer a contradictory svara. That's I'm only threatened by somebody who is right to be Kohen Gadol, but that's not the svara of the Gemara. The svara of the Gemara is if someone on par with me is wearing the Big Kahuna, the Shmoyne Begadim, that wouldn't bother the Kohen Gadol. But if it's a lower level Kohen Gadol, that would bother the Kohen Gadol. Okay, Zok to Gemara. Yosef Rabavo was sitting. He said over this Shmaitzer from Abdimi that the Meshuach Muhammad did wear the Shmoyne Begadim, and he said it Mishmei Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And what did they do? Hadrini, Rabbi Ami, Ravasi, Rabbi Ami and Ravasi were there listening to Rabbi Vo, and they strongly disputed what he said because they held he did not wear the Shmoyne Begadim. So they turned around. Hadrini, Rabbi Ami, Ravasi, Lapayu. They turned around. Why did they turn around? Because they didn't want to protest that Rabbi Vo was wrong out of respect for him, but they felt it was wrong, so they turned around. And Rashi says, "Kloimar loy amra Rabbi Yochanan." They turned around to show that Rabbi Yochanan didn't say this. They didn't agree, but they didn't come outright and argue. Ikadarmi, it wasn't Rabbi Vo who said it, rather the Pri Bar Abba said it. And once again, Vadrinu Rab Ami Rabasi Lapai. If you're saying over the story that occurred with Rabbi saying this, and Rabbi and Rabasi didn't want to protest verbally, I understand why they wouldn't want to protest something that Rabbi said. Mishum Yakri de Bekeser. It was known that Rabbi Rashi says, he was very well connected. And since he was very well connected, they didn't want to argue with him. But the Chi Bar Abba, who was a regular Talmud Chacham, a regular Rebbe who they had no reason to be afraid of, Neimer La Meimar, so tomorrow they should have just said that Lo Am Rabbi Yochanan. Why didn't they just say we disagree with you? And the Gemara doesn't answer that question. Zok to Gemara Vayter. He also Rabin Amar Nishal Itmar. The Gemara Shaila is not. Here, let's see what the Gemara says. Instead of Ravdimi saying that begadim shekan gadol mashamish ben Meshuach Muhammad mashamish ben, it's saying is the begadim that the kohen gadol wears someone who is nishal on the Urim v'Tumim wears. So Zok the Gemara, it's not enough that he was just Meshuach Muhammad. If he was nishal from the Urim v'Tumim, then he wears the Shmoyne Begadim. So it's not, the halach is not that any Meshuach Muhammad wears Shmoyne Begadim. It means anybody who's nishal, as someone who's asking information from Urim v'Tumim, that's the person who we mean is the person who wears the Shmoyne Begadim. So that's Rabbi Amar Nishal Itmar. And we looked at Brayso supporting this. Shekan Gadol Mishamish Bahen Begadim Shekan Gadol Mishamish Bahen Meshuach Muhammad Nishal Bahen. So not that he always has to do the avodah in the Shmoyne Begadim. It means when the occasion occurs that they're going to be asking from a shayla from the Urim v'Tumim, we see here, first of all, is which coin was used to answer questions from the Urim V'Tumim. It was a coin HaMashuach Mochama. It wasn't the main coin Gadol. And during that process, he wore the Shmoyne Begadim, which is somewhat logical because most of the questions that we learned about in Nach that were asked of the Kohen Gadol of the Urim V'Tumim were related to fighting, were related to wars. So it makes sense that they would ask them Shulchan Aruch.
So there's only one Urim V'Tumim. So
Correct.
So that's the real Kohen Gadol. But the Shmoyne Begadim of the Mashiach Milchama did not have the Urim V'Tumim as part of his Choshen.
The Shulchan Muhammad did have the Urim V'Tumim because it's the Urim V'Tumim that was the battery that powered the information center.
So there were two Urim V'Tumim?
Maybe there were two, or maybe when the Kohen was asked, he had to borrow it. Most Rishonim learned that the Urim V'Tumim was a piece of cloth with the Shem Hashem on it.
Right.
So they could have had two.
Don't you need the tzitz also? Doesn't it only work if you have the tzitz?
Yeah, he did wear all Shmoyne Begadim, but he had to have the Urim V'Tumim as well. Yeah, he wore the Shmoyne Begadim, but this is one of them.
Right. So he's So you're saying there's a copy. There was a copy that he wore?
Well, who was wearing the copy? If you ask him, Shulchan Aruch,
No, there were two. There were two of them.
There were two.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the Chosh and everything. So you got two that look exactly. Okay. So then what's so if he needs the Choshen, he needs the Urim V'Tumim, he needs the tzitz. What doesn't he have? Like, what's the machlokas about? What doesn't he have?
We're saying he only wears it. He only wears it while he's answering questions. While he doesn't wear it to do the avodah. Rav Dimi says if he goes to do avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, he'll have to wear Shmoyne Begadim. In this nusach, no, if he does avodah, he's like a regular kohen hedjit. If
he goes to battle, he puts it on.
Asking him a question for that occasion only, will he wear Shmoyne Begadim? Otherwise, he won't wear Shmoyne Begadim.
So would he? You're saying even in the Beis Hamikdash he would put it on, or only when he goes out to battle he would put it on?
Oh, not even then. According to this sheet, it's only when they were asking a question of the Urim V'Tumim. I'm sorry? How do they answer Ma'am Kodesh Meridin? I don't know. It's a good question. Since he sometimes wears it, so how could he do avodah as a kohen hedjit? That's a good shaila. That's a good shaila.
They probably asked that shaila to the Urim V'Tumim.
What was Mechi shaila?
If he wears it even on an individual occasion to answer a question from the Urim V'Tumim, so now you have the problem of Ma'ila Makodesh Meridin. So now he shouldn't be able to.
Once you put it on, you can't take it off.
Unless could be only say Ma'ila Makodesh Meridin. Could be he would hold the only say Ma'ila Makodesh Meridin. If I did avodah once, the Shmoyne Begadim, I'm no longer allowed to do avodah in Ivor Begadim. But if I wear Shmoyne Begadim something else, maybe it won't change my status like I'll be doing the avodah. That's just the works for. My grandmother used to always say, my great grandmother used to always say about like a stramel, when someone wanted to put on extra begadim, she would always say, "Anar titasun, and Ashagit titasos." Okay, Zok the Gemara. That just means a fool puts it on because why do you need extra things? But once you put it on, if you take it off, then you're a shagit already. Tanrabam, Ketzad Shoy Alam. Now that we got into the topic of the Urim V'Tumim, let's see how it worked. It was probably an interesting process. So it says a shoyel part of klap initial. The shoyel is pointing towards the nishal, which means the melech, for instance, is looking at the kohen gadol. A nishal pun of klap shechina, and the nishal is looking at the shechina. So let's visualize this. If the kohen gadol has to look towards the shechina, I'm assuming that his back is to the east. He's facing the west because he's looking towards the kodesh kodshim, right? Which means if the king is facing him, that means the king has his back to the kodesh kodshim, which is a little unusual. There are those Rishonim who learn that the king was behind the kohen gadol, looking at the kohen gadol. So the kohen gadol, his back, the king was looking at the kohen gadol's back, and he was also looking towards the kodesh kodshim, towards the west, and the kohen also looked towards the Ma'ariv. So what happens? Hashoyel Omer, the Shoyel asks the question: Erdoif Acharei Hagedud Hazeh, shall I run after this battalion? Anishal Omer, and the Kohen Gadol answers: Koyamar Hashem, Alei v'hatzlach. Hashem said, go and be Masliach. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ein tzorech loimer Koyamar Hashem. When the Kohen Gadol is giving the answer to the king, he does not say, this says Hashem. It's understood that everything he said is coming straight from Hashem. So all he has to say is precisely what the Urim v'Tumim revealed, and that is Ella Alei v'hatzlach. The next halacha is Ein shoylin b'koil. When the Melech asked the question, he didn't ask it loud; he said it quietly. Shenemar v'shal loy, and Rashi says loy means it was to him, to himself, meaning only he heard it. Matra loy levadoy she'ein shemeya elahu. Only the person asking the question hears. V'loy mahar b'liboy, but he can't just think of the words. He actually has to mouth them, but their mouth and they're said very low. Shenemar v'shal loy l'fnei Hashem, and Rashi tells us that v'shal loy mashma loy levadoy she'ein shemeya elahu, but any mahar b'liboy el yoyte b'svasav ma'oshoyel, because it says v'shal loy b'mishvat urim v'samach loy al piv yetzu. So the words have to come out of his mouth, but it's very low. And like we remember Chana, her lips were moving, but you couldn't hear what she was saying. That's why Eli thought she was a shikayra. She never you cannot ask two things at the same time. You ask one at a time. And if you make a mistake and you ask two things at the same time, they're only going to answer you on one of the two questions, and they'll only answer you on the first question. When David was running away from Shaul, he was in the city of Keilah, and he wanted to know, will the city of Keilah capture me and give me over to Shaul, or will they not capture me? So he asked Hayaskiruni, Bali Keilah biyadoi, and then he asked Hayerit Shaul, is Shaul going to come and get me here? So he asked the question first, will these people capture me and give me over? And only afterwards he asked, is Shaul going to come and try to get me? So what did the Urim v'Tumim answer? Hashem Yerek, he's going to come. Frank the Gemara, so you see, the Urim v'Tumim only answered one question. But the problem is the Urim v'Tumim answered his second question, not his first question. Didn't we just learn that the Urim v'Tumim will answer the first question? The Gemara, it answers the first question. It answers the question that should have been the first question. David Shaul, Shaloi Keseder. David asked the questions out of order. He should have asked first, is Shaul going to come get me? And then, if he comes get me, will the city give me over? Since he asked the two questions out of order, the Chsir like Keseder, they answered him the right order. That yes, Shaul is going to come. Even Shiyoda, Shaul
To give him over when he doesn't come.
No, but normally you ask, am I in trouble? And if I'm in trouble, do I need to escape? Or could I assume they'll protect me? So Bechimin Shiyoda Shaul shall Keseder, once David Chap that he asked out of order, from the answer that he got, Chazam shall Keseder, Shenemar, Hayaskiruni Balakila Oisi, Visanchi Biyad Shaul. So he asked the question again, only the second question. Hashem, Yaskiru, they will, so you better get out of there. However, what if you're in a big rush and you don't have time to stand on ceremony, asking first and second, the enemy's at the gate, and you got to move quickly? If the Shekhinah determines that you need to ask these two questions together, the Shekhinah will answer. A, should I run after them? And B, ha'asikenu? So you see that when things are desperate, the Urim v'Tumim will answer two questions at a time. Even though when the Navi says something, when the Navi says something that's good, we know it's never chosher. But if the Navi says something that's bad, it could be chosher. And Rashi gives an example, the Gzer of Yoina, that Hashem was going to turn over Ninveh. If we do tshuva, the Gzer will be retracted. If the Urim v'Tumim says something good or bad, it will happen. Shenemar b'mishpat ha'urim. The Rashi's kedin she'enei chayzer. It's a mishpat. Whatever comes out from the Urim v'Tumim is guaranteed. Lama nikra shman Urim v'Tumim. Why was it called Urim v'Tumim? Urim sheme'ir nest Ephraim. It lights up its words, meaning Rashi mefarshim nest Ephraim. It answers with clarity. You'll never hear the Urim v'Tumim answer a shaila. It depends. The Urim v'Tumim gives clarity. Wow, how refreshing! Tumim shemashlimin nest Ephraim. It's guaranteed that it will happen. You're going to ask the Gibbous Binyamin in the terrible story when the story of Pelegish Begiva, when all of the Klal Yisrael had to gang up to attack Binyamin, the Urim and Tumim told them to go, and they didn't succeed. They got beaten up. It took a couple of attempts to finally, I think by the third attempt, they finally succeeded. How come it didn't work there? The Gemara, that wasn't the mistake of the Urim and Tumim. Heim shaloi bichnu, im l'tzeich, im l'hinotzeich. They just asked should they go, and the Urim and Tumim said go, but the Urim and Tumim never said if they'll succeed or not, if they'll be the victors or they'll be the losers. But a third time when they asked, they also asked, will be Matzliach, Hiskimu, Shenemar, Upinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron, Oimid Lapana B'Yom Mahem, Lamar, to ask the question, Ha'oisib Oid Lotus L'Mochama, in B'nei B'Yamin, Achi, should I fight again? Im Achtel, or should I stop? V'Yomer Hashem, Alu, go, Ki Machar et Nenebuyadecha. This is the third attempt. Tomorrow, you'll win over B'Yamin. Kate said, Nasis. How did the Urim and Tumim display the information? What occurred? The letters that were on the Choshen popped out. They stuck out, but they were scrambled. So there was just a series of letters that had to be unscrambled. Not only did they pop out, but they also joined together to spell a word. So according to this shot, I'm not sure why Eli thought she was a shikara, because the letter should have been in order. So I'm not sure how that works. Frank the Gemara, how would this work? There's many words that couldn't have been expressed. But like Sidbu Tzadi, there is no tzaddik in all of the Shavatim. So if that's the case, we said earlier, it said Hatzel, Tatzel, how in the world could it ever display the letter tzaddik? Amar Shema Yitzchak, not only does it have the Shvatim, it also says Avram Yitzchak v'Yakov, there's still no test, but like test. Amar Bacha b'Yakov, Shifta Yeshurun Ksiv Sham. Why does it say Shifta Yeshurun? Because Yeshurun is one of the names of Hashem. And if you do the math and you add up all the letters, including Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Shifta Yeshurun, there are 72 letters on the Avnei HaChoshen, and that adds up to the same amount of letters as the longest Shem Hashem, the longest Shem HaMefarish. There's a question as to how they were distributed. There are some who learned that there was the same amount of letters on each stone, so they just added a couple of letters to each stone to include the extra letters of Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Shifta Yeshurun. There are those who say it was added at the end. Meisvei, Kol Koyin she'eni medaber beruach hakodesh u'shchina shayir alav ein shayir. If the Kohen Gadol cannot speak with Ruach HaKodesh, you can't ask him, because you need the Kohen Gadol to decide with Ruach HaKodesh to decipher what the Urim and Tumim was saying. Sharei Shal Tzaddik, they asked Tzaddik Kohen, but also and they got an answer. But of Yosar, V'lo also and they didn't get the answer. Rashi says when David was running away from Avshalom, Yosha couldn't answer, so they could. So you see, you need to have the Ruach HaKodesh to decipher what it means. So you have a Messiah Ba'adai. The question is, if the Urim and Tumim spelled out, it was mitzvahs, it spelled out exactly the answer, why did the Kohen Gadol need to have Ruach HaKodesh to decipher it? The text is, so you have a Messiah Ba'adai. It was his Ruach HaKodesh that also helped to give the Urim and Tumim the power. Let's see Rashi. So you have a Messiah, Kohen B'hadi Urim and Tumim. The Kohen's Kedusha also was part of the formula that made the Urim and Tumim work. Then the Oisius Boltois Oimit Starpis al Yodoi Kishin Shalom Boy. But if the Kohen Gadol didn't have the right Madrega, then this whole system would have worked. Loy Boltois, Loy Starpis. That's right. They turn El Melech, only a Melech can ask. You know, and immediately, how do you know only a Melech? Amar Brod, Amar Kra, Bulafnei, Al Dozar Kohen, Yamoid, the Shal Loy, the Mishpat Ha'urim, and we dash in the Pasuk. There's more words to the Pasuk. It says who. Let's look at the whole Pasuk inside, because the whole Pasuk inside includes all the words that the Gemara is going to darshan. It says, Vayem Hashem Moshe, Kach Yeshua Benun Ish Asher Ruach Boy B'Shamach B'Shad Cha'alav V'Fnei Elazar Kohen Yamoid V'Shalai B'Mishvat Alim V'Fnei Hashem Al Piv Yetzav Al Piv Yavayu who V'Chol B'Nei Yisrael. So the Gemara darshans who Zemelech V'Chol B'Nei Yisrael Itoi Zem Meshuach Mochama V'Chol Ha'eda is referring to the Sanhedrin. So those are the people who are royu to ask questions of the Urim and Tumim, and nobody else. Hadin Lach Balak Gadol, Hadin Lach Balak Gadol, Hadin Lach Balak Gadol. Talk to Gemara. Yom Kippur. Now we're going to learn Chil Hashem Kippur. Also bachila, uvishtia, uverchitza, uvesicha, uvenilas asandul, uvatash b'shamit. These are the 5 inuim: eating, drinking, bathing, smearing, wearing leather shoes, and tash b'shamit. V'amelech v'akala, the exception to this rule is that a melech and a kala, yerchachos name, they could wash their faces. And Rashi says by a melech is darkoi ushvach elias no. He always has to look good. And the kala is shetechavev al baila. And how long is she a kala? For 30 days, Rashi says. However, v'achaya, and a woman who gave birth, who it's hard for her not to wear leather shoes, tinal as a sandal, she also has the exemption for nil sandal. Rabbi Eliezer, that's Rabbi Eliezer, who holds their only midrabanan. The Chum holds that all these people don't have the exemptions mentioned above. If you ate a shear, not of a kazayis, but of a kesevis, it's like a big fig, including the mass of the fruit as well as the mass of the seed, that's a chiv kares. Or one who drinks a full cheek of liquids, chayiv, he'll be chayiv kares. Any food, you don't have to have one food of a kesevis, you can have multiple foods that combine to be a kesevis, and it'll be a problem. And all mashkin are mitzarfin to malay lugmav, but you cannot have a half a kesevis of food and a half a malay lugmav of drink, and that would be chiv kares. That doesn't work. They don't combine. So osir. Why does it say that it's osir? On this kares, what do you mean osir b'achila? The Mishnah talks about osir b'achila. There's a chiv kares. It's telling you that when are you chayiv kares if you had the full shear? The Mishnah is trying to tell you even if you had half a shear, you only ate a part of the shear. That's also osir midaraisa. That's why the Mishnah wants to tell us that also. If you hold the chati shears and mutum in the Torah, told us midarbanon, ma'ikol meimar. Itmar, we had a machlokes. Chati shear, Rabbi Yochanan, are also in the Torah, and Rish Lakish said mutum in the Torah. Hanichel Rabbi Yochanan. It makes sense according to Rabbi Yochanan. It's also in the Torah. The Mishnah says Yom Kippur also b'achila. El Rish Lakish, ma'ikol meimar. What's shot according to Rish Lakish? But tomorrow, Moed Rish Lakish also midarbanon. Rish Lakish holds even though it's mutter midaraisa eat a chati shear, midarbanan it's also. So when the Mishnah says Yom Kippur also b'achila, it means midarbanan it's also. Okay, we'll stop here because from here on it gets a little complicated into a new sugya. So we'll stop here. Baruch Hashem, we finished the parak. We're in the last parak, I believe, of Yuma, and we're coming to the end. I think it's about next Friday. 2 weeks Friday, so we're getting to the final chapters. So it's Kishmak. So have a wonderful day, everybody.
So what kind of a job did Yosy get?
Yeah.
Yosy Wolf.